So, a very big welcome to you all to today. Today is a really special occasion because Torin and I have been speaking and we wanted to share a conversation that we've started to have. It's really called Education Reimagined, supporting parents, children, and educators in this time of COVID-19. And our intention is to offer you practical and philosophical perspectives with an opportunity for live questions and answers in online sessions afterwards. This is a kind of global crisis that we're facing as a human family. And it's, of course, bringing up a lot of stuff for children and families and teachers. And suddenly we're in this unusual circumstance where we all find ourselves at home. So we thought we'd really enter into this conversation to just see what is out there and what parents need in order to feel better supported at this time. I just wanted to share a few words about Torin. So Dr. Torin Finser has been serving Waldorf education for more than 40 years, first as a class teacher and then as a director of Waldorf teacher education at Antioch University, New England, and later as chair of the education department. He's a former general secretary of the Anthroposophical Society in America. He has helped found the Center for Anthroposophy in New Hampshire. His research and writings have reached people all over the world, with several books now translated into multiple languages. Torin has served as a consultant, workshop leader, and keynote speaker at numerous international conferences. He's married to Karin, has 6 children, and is now also a very happy grandfather. Torin, I'm so excited to be speaking with you. I know I had the opportunity to speak with you first at Festival of the Child last year, and I just found that our conversation was so enlivening and rich and full of heart. And I really think that, especially in these times, that it's important to keep having these conversations, not just amongst ourselves, but with a wider community online, because, so many families need support. And of course, this crisis we're facing, there are obvious implications for our healthcare and economic systems. And as neither of us are medically trained or epidemiologists, I've just learned that word recently, we're not going to address those things in this conversation. But I just wondered if maybe as a place to start, you could share what you think are some of the deeper issues that are actually going on at this time.
Thank you, Priya. It's wonderful to be back in conversation with you. There's nothing better than a conversation in which people can find one another now virtually more than ever and find ways to share ideas, to share feelings, to share perspectives and reaffirm our common striving and our humanity because the world is desperately looking for the human beings of the future and how we can relate, how we can practice the human encounter. And what you have done, Priya, with the Festival of the Child and now again, and with all your conversations with people, is you are building that human connection. And we need to applaud that and feel a sense of gratitude when it can happen. Because I think maybe the first thing I would like to share is this whole notion of staying at home, which affects parents, children, so many professionals who are no longer in their normal place of work. This notion of staying at home. Outwardly, we know what that looks like. It means educating one's children at home. It means college students doing their virtual courses, high school students, many. It means having groceries delivered, perhaps, instead of going out to the marketplace. It means working in your yard, but not necessarily socializing and doing the other things that one might have done. Staying at home outwardly, wherever one's home might be, whether it's a room or an apartment or a house, has a physical aspect to it. But there's another aspect as well, which has to do with attending to a new life rhythm. Those who used to rush out in the morning and grab that cup of coffee on the way and go to work, and the commute in a car or a train or whatever it may have been. The routines of life have been disrupted. So, on the level of life forces and routines and rhythm, one has to find a new way now. The rhythm of the home is different than the rhythm of the workplace. And then on a third level, there is the question of how do we occupy our, our thought life? How are we working with this all inwardly? So much of our stimuli used to come from the external prompts of colleagues and people we meet on the street, emails, and so on. Now we have to attend to our thought life in a different way, and our consciousness. How are we carrying our consciousness? Are we at home with our thoughts? Not just at home in a building, but are we at home with our thinking? Are we able to hold our thoughts in a new way? And the last part I'd like to bring forward of being at home is, where really is my home within myself? Regardless of the physical surroundings and the life patterns and the consciousness, where am I at home within myself? And my experience with COVID-19 on that level of finding one's inner home is an experience of being thrust back upon oneself. It's as if it's me, myself, and I, in many ways deprived of many of the outer supports, but now having to really face things in the soul. And the meditative work and how one works with the inner life becomes no longer just a nice extra, which some people may have seen it as, but now this being at home within oneself, I think also has to do with how we find ourselves within the soul. So that was the first thing I wanted to bring forward, is this whole notion of being at home, that it's not just a physical reality. The second piece that I mentioned in my article in World of Today on COVID-19 and the existential crisis is this way of looking at things from a phenomenological point of view. What are the phenomena telling us? And that is really interesting, to just look at what is happening and not form a judgment right away, but just to look, to observe. And there are many, many aspects of it. But one I would like to just touch on right now is the whole notion of fear and courage. Mm. There is so much in the media, in the reporting of the number of cases. Just in the United States, up to 100,000 cases of coronavirus. The death toll mounting every day. There is so much of fear, justifiable fear. We have a colleague, who has family members with COVID-19. Delivered food yesterday, thinking about those dear people, thinking of those in the hospitals, and the rationing of medical care in Italy and all that. There is so much that brings fear. And how do we work with fear as a phenomenon? Not just as something that gets you in the gut, but how do we work with fear? How do we find courage to step forward again and not let fear rule us every minute of the day? So I mentioned rationing of medical care in Lombardy, Italy. I'm wondering if parents and those who are living with all of this need to ration the amount of intake of the news and what is happening, just to ration that a little bit, not to become heartless and insensitive. I'm wondering about countermeasures to fear. And I have found 2 or 3 really helpful, and I just want to mention that, and then I know you have many other things you'd like to talk about, Priya. But one is so simple, it's walking. There's something fascinating about walking,
Mm.
placing oneself in movement and a kind of optimism that one will move forward and thoughts will arise as one is walking. Walking is therapeutic. I can't go to the gym anymore. I can't swim, but I can walk. Secondly, sunlight. I was out this morning. First thing, we have a few hours of sun, and then it's going to be cloudy the rest of the weekend.
Mm.
The amazing quality of sun and the connection with corona and all that comes with it, vitamin D, as you said, I don't want to go into the medical aspects.
Mm.
But sunlight, when I am out in the sun, I gain courage and hope.
Mm.
And the last part is the courage that comes from doing inner work. And for me, it's the research, it's the delving deeper into questions. Right now, I'm working on a book project around Waldorf teacher education. How can we find the inner muscles and develop the inner muscles that come with active questioning and searching and reading and learning and working with thoughts, that we become also like an inner sun that can shine out and push back against some of the fear around us.
Well, there's so much in what you've shared. I could go off in lots of different directions. I just wanted to come back with a few things. I was just thinking that, you know, my daughter goes to a school and it's actually about 36 miles away. So I don't know what that is in kilometers, but it's quite some distance. So it takes 45 minutes in the car in the morning and about an hour, sometimes even an hour and a quarter in the car on the way home. And as my children have both been home, I think, was it a week or 2 weeks? I'm losing sense of time now. Um, it's just extraordinary because although, our lives have been so busy, being in quarantine and now lockdown, none of us are ill or have any symptoms, but of course we're observing the staying at home rules, which are now enforceable. But it's actually allowing us as a family to connect more with each other. And I can see my daughter, who's 13, she's kind of decompressing because suddenly she's gifted 2 hours in a day that she didn't have before. And I feel like as her mother, I'm more in connection with who she is as a human being. And as her mother, I feel so grateful for this time and this opportunity to be with my children. I mean, not to say that it's been all that easy, because just to pick up another point that you raised about our intake of media, certainly in the beginning, like a few weeks ago, I was, avidly, voraciously reading and watching absolutely every single piece of news that you could possibly consume from all ends of the spectrum. I've the whole thing about whether it came from bats or whether it's 5G or whether it's some more nefarious kind of bioengineered thing. In some ways, I feel like it doesn't really even matter what it is or where it's come from. And I know that there are a lot of people in, the healthcare sector who are really looking at how to, support people who come, who get this disease and, virus, sorry, and, how can they be supported? But the fact remains is that whatever reason we think that it is caused from, it's here. And we're all at home. And we're all at home with our children. And I feel like, as I've come off watching lots of news and media, that my sense of inner well-being as a mother and human being has dramatically increased. And, I like to keep abreast of what's going on. So I'm now dipping in again a bit more consciously. But I just feel that, I'm noticing for myself that not consuming huge amounts of media has allowed me to connect more to who I am on the inside as a person and mother, and what kind of mother I want to be in relation to my children. And just being with my children. The other day, we'd gone for a walk. I'm lucky enough to live with fields behind our house. And of course, here in England, where I live, today it's a bit kind of grey, but pretty much for the last week, it has been just gorgeous sunshine. The skies have been blue, and it's just been so profoundly beautiful. And there's this kind of stillness and peacefulness in the like physical surroundings. And walking with my children just felt just like you said, you know, one foot in front of the other. It's like a kind of meditation, a breathing meditation. And we came back into the house and it just feels like as a family, we have a chance to breathe out. And like lots of families, and I'm sure lots of people listening to us now, you know, might be in the same circumstances I surely am, because I'm self-employed, I'm a single parent. And, you know, I definitely have some of the kind of anxiety and panic that I was experiencing in the beginning, you know, a few weeks ago, was certainly around how am I going to pay my bills, or how am I going to pay for food, or how am I going to pay my rent? And all those concerns still are living, and they're things I'm needing to address. But I feel like just this slowing down and this pause and this deep rest that I'm also experiencing is really, it feels like there's a kind of a golden key or a secret hidden in that. And of course, you know, I live like lots of people, a very busy existence. Um, and I think a lot of us do. I think, you know, if I've spoken to about 40 or 50 parents in the last few days, and pretty much everybody without exception has said how extraordinarily busy life has been, and how, you know, obviously there are challenges being at home now permanently with children, well, for the foreseeable future. Um, but I just think there's really something in this pause.
Yes, the pause that refreshes.
Yes.
I've noticed just bicycling and walking, the streets are empty and there's less pollution.
Mm.
I've noticed the silence as well, fewer cars. We live on a street corner, so the cars would often start at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and everything has slowed down. Um, there are many ways we can extol the virtues of what we're going through, and I'm glad you brought up those points, Priya. Just so we stay also grounded, there
Mm.
are many, many challenges. And
Yes, of course.
speaking with parents as you have, you've also heard how hard it is to juggle work and care of children's school life.
Mm.
It's not easy. I know one family with 5 children, and it's very hard to have separate programming for each child based on their age level and the packets and the materials that are coming from school, online of work, and also some semblance of work, and still keeping food on the table.
Mm.
So there are those aspects as well. And maybe when I'm talking about the challenges, also, I think people are somewhat raw inwardly.
Mm.
There's a kind of sensitivity. One has to be very careful with emails and with face-to-face conversations, because what used to just often just pass quickly now can often hit a raw nerve,
Mm.
because we're all sensitized in a way that we haven't been before. So I think what you described is so inspiring, Priya, and we have to work more consciously with all the things that you and I are trying to bring forward today, and also realize that in a way everything's being surfaced, the good and the challenging. It's all
Mm.
being surfaced right now.
Well, I mean, actually, you know, you raised a lot of very good points. And the other side of the coin is that parents suddenly have their children at home, of, you know, particularly if you've got more than one child and you've got all different types of work and assignments and, you know, online programs coming home. And I think it's challenging also for schools, because it's not clear how to deliver those online programs, or, you know, whether this is homeschooling or distance learning or something else. And I think that, you know, I'd be really interested to hear what you might have to share. You know, well, for two groups in particular. One would be parents, actually, because, you know, I've listened to a lot of parents, and some of them are saying, well, actually, this is a time to kind of bond and connect with your child and not really worry too much about materials coming from school. But then on the other hand, of course, you know, schools, particularly if you're in a fee paying school, for example, teachers, might be feeling the pressure to deliver content in order to, justify receiving fees and also to keep their communities thriving. Because in the not too distant future, presumably we'll all be going back to school. And then what's life going to look like? I mean, I think, that there are so many different ways of looking at this. And I really want to see how we can find some ways to support parents, particularly, with younger children. I mean, even my children are 13 and 17, but even my daughter, who was doing these kind of exam type papers because it was an exam week, she had tears in her eyes and was really feeling very weary from this kind of more dry interface of just doing lots of papers. And I think that's really challenging because children, of course, also have just lost that social contact with their peers and all that interaction that's so important for them. So I was just wondering, what do you think we could do that might better support parents, or what kind of message do you think that we need to be sharing with parents at this time so that they can feel better empowered in these kind of crazy circumstances that they find themselves in?
Yes, and well, this is where I welcome participation from many others in the weeks to come. If we can have these conversations with more and more people, sharing ideas, sharing resources will be so valuable. I would like to just strike a theme of distinguishing between the essential and the less essential.
Mm.
I think that's, again, one of the phenomena that's coming towards us. What really matters? What is essential? And what perhaps is less so? You mentioned, Priya, the bonding. That I think most people would put that in the essential column. But there are many other things. I had this morning when I was on my walk the image of, and I'm sure many can relate to this, of a closed closet or a chest of drawers with clothes. And you know how it is, you accumulate things. And you stuff things on, in a drawer, and you get more and more stuff. Things pushed to the back you don't even know you had anymore. In a closet, you might be double hanging, triple hanging things, and things are underneath you don't know. We have accumulated a lot of stuff.
Mm.
And I think what is being asked of us now is to go through those drawers, go through those closets,
Mm.
and take out, throw away many of the things that are less essential and come back to those that are more essential. And I use the metaphor of the clothes because that is so easy just to accumulate things. You bought this on sale and whatever. It's also true in education that we have accumulated more and more things. From the one-room schoolhouse, we've gone to larger schools. We have buildings with all kinds of labs and libraries, and we have after-school programs and more and more stuff in our educational system. And I think what we're being asked to do as parents and teachers now is to go back to core principles and to the essentials. What are we really trying to do? How can we, with a young child, have a story time that is really nourishing? How can we work with crafts and with our hands in a way that really engages the gross motor skills and creates something that's useful for the house and for the world? How, with the older students, can we look at some of the essentials in science or literature and work with the themes and not worry about all the trappings that come in almost any lesson? I think for parents at home, the first question every day could be, what are the essentials for today?
It's a good place to start.
I think we're being asked to look at what are the essentials for the day ahead and to take one day at a time and not rely on all the tools that we've had in the past. I remember when I started teaching, my school did not have a science lab, and I had to go down in the basement and create the science experiments the night before. And now when I walk into science classes, there's so much stuff. All the things that, not only physical things, but lessons and PowerPoint presentations and curriculum plans and so on. We've just layered everything on and on. And as a society, we've come to a massive place of indigestion.
Mm.
And COVID-19 is asking us to do a mighty cleanse,
Mm.
a mighty cleanse, personally, family wise, educationally, socially, a huge cleanse. And the hope is that we emerge out of that as new human beings.
It's actually interesting because some of the parents that I've been speaking with have been saying exactly that, that they, how can they be expected to suddenly deliver all these curriculums and lessons and, you know, manage multiple children at the same time, never mind, you know, the equity question about whether you even have access to the internet or devices in the first place. And I think that, you know, in a way it's placing an extraordinary strain on an already strained situation, because a lot of families, understandably, also like myself, you know, have to think about how am I going to earn a living and pay for things. So, you know, on top of that, suddenly being kind of the facilitator of your child's learning process, you know, that's something that most parents kind of give the child or a teenager or a young person to school, and kind of obviously you support your children, but to suddenly have that kind of burden of responsibility as a parent is very difficult for a lot of families. Never mind, you know, the kind of inner anxiety and stress that parents can feel just anyway with the anxiety and uncertainty of the situation in the first place. And I think that something that's also becoming really clear is that families need to, you know, that we need to find ways of supporting each other as parents and teachers and as communities coming together, because we can't do this kind of in isolation. I think it's really interesting. There's been kind of a lot of content online about social distancing. Can we call it physical distancing, not social distancing? Because, you know, even in the supermarket the other day, when of course we're all 2 meters apart from each other and the long queues outside and people have got masks on and gloves on their hands, it just this kind of, you know, almost if you go too close to another human being, some people like look at you in horror and kind of jump back. And it creates a very uncomfortable atmosphere. And I feel like that it's really important to find ways online for parents to come together in particular, so that we can lean into support and, you know, nourishment and rest, because otherwise, you know, these kind of qualities of anxiety and fear and stress, of which I've also lived, they do translate in our home lives, and our children pick up on pretty much everything and mirror those kind of behaviors and feelings back to us really quickly. And the other thing I just want to say quickly is that, you know, of course, as adults, nobody really knows, you know, it's such a sort of like stepping into the unknown continuously, but our children are having the same thoughts and feelings. And I'm just sort of curious and interested to know, you know, like you talked about the essentials, what are the kind of core essentials that we can, you know, hold on to, if you like, in our inner understanding, so that we can be kind of guardians and protectors of our children's future, so that we're not necessarily, you know, so that we're protecting them as much as we reasonably can from the kind of pandemic of fear and anxiety and uncertainty.
Yeah, there's so many things you said that I would like to speak to, Priya, but I'll start with where you ended up. Some of the essentials for children, of course, will vary depending on the age. Your 13-year-old, 17-year-old are very different than they were at age 6.
Mm.
For the younger ones, I think it's very important that they still have physical activity in their day and that they have imaginative story content and that they have project-based learning so that they can do things. They do not get the feedback from their peers and their teachers in a classroom
Mm.
the way they might have in the past. But when you do a project, when you do pyramids in studying Egypt, when you try to clay model the Sphinx, when you do a project, then you see right away a kind of mirroring back your learning. And it's deeply satisfying to create something with one's hands. So the three things I'd recommend is physical activity, project-based learning, and work with imagination. For the young child, it's storytelling. And many of the early childhood teachers that I've been in touch with are sending home stories that parents can tell or read. With the older students, biography. This is a great time to study the lives of great women and men who have done remarkable things, who have struggled, and who've dealt with adversity. So those are some of the essential things on the home front. I'd like to squeeze in a word about social distancing because you mentioned going to shopping.
Yes.
And it's interesting to deal with that. It's a whole new set of challenges, as we all know. But I've also noticed that people that I used to pass on the street, walking their dog, or you just sort of nod a greeting, now, even though we're 6 to 12 feet apart, sometimes we switch to the other side of the street so that we keep that social distance. There's often a smile and an exchange of a few words with random strangers.
Absolutely.
And my father has been very good at that. At age 88, he's been doing that for a number of years.
Wow.
He lives alone, and you know he loves reaching out to random strangers and having conversation. But I've only started to notice more of that happening in my town. And then the last thing I wanted to latch on to, see, Priya, when you share things, it gets me going on many levels. Of the first thing you said early on was staying connected. And how we stay connected and support each other. I wanted to put in a plea for us to stay connected with those teachers who are not in schools but are struggling to deliver curriculum, and particularly those teachers who do not have taxation money, federal funding, paying for their paychecks. There are some schools that have reported requests for refunds, the independent schools. Parents saying, my child is not in the early childhood program, and I'm having to provide early childhood at home. I want a refund. I don't want to make any payments. And I can understand where that's coming from if one thinks of education as a commodity. But what I would like to put out there is that education is not a commodity, that it's actually a service. And we have a local fire department here in Keene. It's an excellent fire department. Those fire trucks sit in the garage. The men and women who are professionals there, they're paid day in and day out. We don't say, I will pay taxation money to you when you put out my fire.
Yes.
We say to the men and women in the fire department, we will pay for your salaries and we'll pay for your service because we think it's a valuable thing to have a functioning fire department in Keene, New Hampshire. We see that very clearly with the fire department. And I would just like to put out a plea that we view teachers and other professionals who are not working in their usual way, that we, as much as possible, recognize what they offer as a service and a livelihood and not as a pay-per-use situation, because that reduces us to treating everything as if we're buying shoes. And there are many things in life that are not commodities, that are extremely valuable for humanity. And this notion of service, we have to keep that alive because that goes to the core of our humanity.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think if you'd have said to any Waldorf in particular teacher around the globe a few months ago that learning might have to happen online, they probably wouldn't have believed you. And yet here we are in 2020, faced with a kind of unprecedented challenge of how do we still maintain the strong communities that are such a key feature of Waldorf communities and schools, but in this kind of challenging circumstance. And I just wondered if you had anything that you could share to speak to teachers in particular who might be listening, particularly from Waldorf communities, about ways in which they can really stay connected and engaged, not just with their pupils and children, but also with their wider communities of parents and colleagues?
It's a work in progress. I
Mm,
do not have any answers.
mm,
I only have questions and opportunities to speak with some of the alums who have gone through the Antioch University CFA programs, who are now working from home, delivering curriculum. I've
mm,
asked several of our alums to try and keep a journal and write down some of their learning,
mm,
what is working, what has not worked, because this can become a research project. This can become a community opportunity to really understand the best that is possible with online education and what really has been a struggle.
mm,
So I'd like to emphasize this notion of we're learning this together.
mm,
I'll offer one thought to be more concrete, and that is we might want to distinguish, as we have in classrooms traditionally, between different segments of the lesson. There's often a portion that we call presentation. With the young children, it's the telling of a story or the presentation of a lesson. With the older ones, the science experiment. Um, there's the part where the teacher takes a lead role. I have found in my conversations and my own experience that a lot of that can still happen very well virtually.
mm,
If you have an engaging storyteller, there's still a lot that comes through when it's on the screen. Then there's a second part of learning which happens through conversation, through group work. Some of that one is working with in terms of dividing into chat groups and organizing a Zoom session into various conversation groups.
mm,
Depending on the age of the children, that can be more or less successful.
mm,
The third component of education in most lessons has to do with the hands-on, the actual doing of the science experiment, the actual creating projects. That I think is where some may be most challenged because not everybody has the material at
mm,
home. It's not easy just to run out and grab this and that for a science experiment or to do a craft project.
mm,
And I'm concerned that, to put it crassly, the thinking aspect of education will be served. Some of the feeling aspect can be served, maybe less so. But I'm particularly concerned with the gross motor, the project based learning,
mm,
where children can go out and construct something in the forest and then come back and have learned and share what they have built. That kind of work together, the cooperative community work, I think may be the greatest challenge. And maybe with some of these areas that we identify as most challenging, the areas where we're not so successful in these next weeks, maybe then we can put that as kind of a New Year's resolution
mm,
that when we reopen, we emphasize
mm,
more than ever before project based learning,
mm.
work in community, work in groups, work outdoors, nature based work. Maybe we can make a collective resolve to do that part 150% when we reopen
Mm,
because it will have been underserved during these weeks.
mm. I think there's so much richness in what you've shared. Something that we're doing at the School of Sophia, and it's not together yet, but we're putting together a kind of I think it's going to be called something like 30 Days of Creativity in Quarantine or something like this. And it's just a sort of resource pack, and it will have just an activity to do every day, something very simple that, maybe it's just sharing a story, or maybe a small puppet thing, or making something in the garden if that's available, or and lots of different ideas. But the idea is to just offer particularly younger families just space to engage with something that could be fun and a bit kind of hands-on and experiential, just for a child to have that experience of learning without it being kind of structured in a kind of school type way, to take some of the
Yeah.
pressure off parents from feeling that they now have to be teachers. Because of course, like you've said, often in our conversations that we are really all in this together, and it is a kind of active learning research project, really, because we're all finding our way. And I just think that, there are one of the things that has really touched my heart as we've gone through this process is the incredible amount of resources online. Suddenly you can watch plays at the National Theatre or opera, or visit aquariums, or visit museums, download books. It's a bit information overload in a way, but the online space has responded with so much generosity that suddenly you can have a virtual tour of a museum that you always wanted to visit, or watch a play. And I think that probably for older children in particular, that's can be really stimulating.
Yes, thank you. It's interesting. You often say something in a direction that I would have gone if the tables had been turned, and you just brought this wonderful opportunity aspect of all that we can do, which then provokes in me also a cautionary note.
Yes.
That you might have taken my stance and I might have taken yours. That's what happens in conversation.
Absolutely.
But I just want to, Waldorf education, as I've been describing more and more in the past years, was founded on a social mandate. There was really a social mandate behind the founding of the first school, in terms of accessibility, in terms of equal education for girls and boys, in terms of the way teachers were to work together, and inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. We have to be careful in every moment in time that we remember to look through the lens of social justice, even in this moment in which we are right now. And I just want to sound the theme of social justice, income inequality, and white privilege. We have to be careful when we're doing instruction online and when we are asking parents to do certain things at home. That we not assume that the average parent can go to some closet and open it up and find a whole array of pastels.
Yes, absolutely.
Of quality painting paper, of clay, of materials for science experiments, of all these things that we might be asking, and expecting out of a place of privilege. There are people also who may have struggled in their own education, or may have experienced discrimination in ways that now come forward when they are put into the role of quasi-teacher on the home front. We all have some baggage from our own childhood and our own education, and we have to be careful that we not hinder our own work, but just be mindful all the time to look through the lens of social justice and make sure that way we work with things online is not a perpetuation of white privilege, but that we open ourselves to the reality of many people in many different circumstances, where some may have real limitations from a variety of point of view, from a variety of perspectives around delivery of education, even down to accessibility with computer and internet, etc. There are children who are still getting their lunches delivered. They're having lunches, school lunches are still being provided, because otherwise they wouldn't be having that meal in the day. So I just wanted to bring this aspect of Corona-19. Let's also always be mindful of the social justice theme as well.
Yeah, I think it's really great that you mentioned that. And I think it's something that I certainly will really take to heart as we're putting together these resources, to make sure that, that it's easily available resources that somebody might have in their home already, or not really involving too much kind of outer material. I'm just thinking about, this whole question about reimagining education in the first place, because of course, there is a big debate, isn't there, in the world at large about, the increasing standardization of education, and is the education that we're offering children, I'm not just talking about Waldorf schools, just just globally, is it really serving the needs of children? And I know that you've talked a lot and written a lot about beyond Waldorf 100, and I know last year we celebrated, of course, 100 years of Waldorf education, and that you often have a very forward thinking, well, what are the next 100 years going to bring? And I just wondered if there's anything that you might want to share or have started thinking about, particularly in light of COVID-19 in these times, that might offer us an opportunity to do things differently, because like it or not, we all are faced with this huge pause and reset, and whilst we might have different levels of struggle and ease which might change moment to moment with that pause, it is an opportunity to look at, well, what is working. It's a little bit of what you were saying in the beginning, what's working for me as a human being in my own life and what's not working. And if they're saying that we might be at home till September, we don't know, or schools might open in September, but whatever it is, if we're home for the next handful of months, well, what are the things we're going to are we going to want to go back to business as usual and life as it was before, and the ways of working in the world and the ways of learning in schools? Because I'm not sure that, given the choice, that we're wanting to pick up. I mean, some of the things obviously were working, but I'm just sort of wondering if you could speak a bit to what you think that this moment in time is also bringing us at a sort of systemic level. I'm not sure if that's the right way to put it.
Thank you for your forward thinking there and looking at the future of education. I think the future is full of opportunity, and how we reopen our schools is as important as the date and time when they reopen. How, on what basis do we reopen our schools? How do we recognize community and celebrate and work with community? Is it just back at school, 8 a.m. in the morning, same class schedules? The bell rings, you go to the next class. Is it business as usual? Or is it a new school? And I would love to really look at that question with you over a series of conversations and invite more and more people into the conversation. The reopening of education and schools. How will that look? So, having just affirmed your question, I'm going to offer just one picture. The Waldorf style is always to work with a picture or imagination. Hopefully it speaks to a larger reality. If not, I apologize. I would like to take you back to ancient Greece, over 2,000 years ago, 2.5, way, way, way back. And imagine yourself on a street corner in Athens. And you pass by an elderly gentleman clad in the traditional Greek white and standing there having conversation. And you stop and you listen in a little bit, and a small group of people gather around. And you realize that they're debating some very interesting topics. It's not just how are you, fine, and so on. They're questioning assumptions. They're talking about the nature of virtue and what is love and how does one achieve knowledge. They're really working through dialogue. And the person at the center is this elderly gentleman who is asking one question after another, not telling so much, but really asking questions and engaging people in dialogue. The individual I had in mind in that picture that I just shared with you is Socrates.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, and the Socratic dialogue. There is so much potential in dialogue. In a way, if you take this moment of stripping away all the unessential and coming back to some of the themes I brought forward in this conversation about finding oneself again, being back at home, coming to the core, one could say that the education of the future might have more of this quality of the dialogue, especially with the older students, and less of the trappings that we've come to expect as part of schools, including all our materials and our labs and our computers and technology and the latest software. The bare bones of engaging dialogue, Socratic dialogue. What would that be like if we had learning centers, not necessarily on every street corner, because again, there are some street corners that are not safe. And there's some street corners in the world that are not quiet enough to really have enough dialogue to hear one another. Mm-hmm. But how would that be if our schools became activity centers and that the location became less important, but the activity would become more important? Mm. So we already have in our forest-based kindergarten movement, we already have an outdoor educational work, we already have in terms of Outward Bound and many other ventures, this notion that learning can happen outside of the boundary of the walls of a classroom. But what if we were able to push that even further and build the future of education with the older students in particular, more and more around dialogue? When I say this sort of thing, people always say, well, that implies that we have a Socrates at every street corner. And I understand where that's coming from. And certainly a beginning teacher or a parent may not feel that they could do all that educating through dialogue. But I am amazed at what comes forth from people when they engage in conversation. Just look at what's happened in this last hour with the two of us, Priya. I did not have any notes. I had not prepared anything. But look at what has happened just in this conversation. Socrates felt that all learning is recollection. And that when you engage in conversation and the constant questioning, you are calling forth out of the deep recesses of the human soul and the past experience, you're calling forth learning that already resides. The material, the knowledge already resides within the human being. And those of us who've worked with children for many years have known that sometimes the youngest child comes forth with the most remarkable words of wisdom that one could not have Googled or studied or written a doctoral thesis about. The child who comes forward with insights, it comes from a deep place of knowing. And sometimes education, as we've traditionally have practiced education, serves almost as a kiss of death for that native ability to bring forth the learning, the knowledge that resides within. Because if you give children a lot of programmed education, you're basically saying it's my way or the highway. These are the ways you need to think. This is the sequencing of a lesson. This is how learning should happen. And many of those innate qualities that live in children are squashed. So when Ivan Illich and Paulo Freire speak about deschooling and pedagogy of the oppressed, we need to listen to these wise elders. And when Sylvia Ashton Warner spoke about what happened in New Zealand with the Maori children she was working with and the imposition of the Dick and Jane readers and a certain style of education, we need to listen. Because I feel that through dialogue and through real conversation, we may be able to rebuild our schools around activity centers and not institutions. And for me, that is very exciting. And I hope I live long enough to be able to engage in that project with you, Priya, and many other people in the years ahead.
Wow. As I'm listening to you, I'm reminded of how every encounter I've had with you, there's always this moment in speaking with you that I feel, I can feel it. I feel like my eyes are sort of almost filled with tears, and I feel an extraordinary gratitude to be able to have this conversation and this conversation with you, because there's so much richness. And I think, this spirit of inquiry that you're speaking to and, living in the questions it feels like it like opens this whole pathway out into the future where hope lives. and possibility. And it's funny because at School of Sophia, one of the kind of foundation stones of the vision for that platform is really about awakening the living wisdom within you. And so you have just very eloquently reflected back to me a vision that I'm holding also in my deepest heart. And so as we're speaking, as in all the times that we've spoken, I'm sitting in the resonance of that field. And my wish is that as we continue these conversations, as we're going to in the next month, that others can also feel supported and nourished and encouraged and inspired by this field that we're co-creating together. And that from that place, who knows what, we don't know, who knows what will come. But I feel that, these are truly extraordinary times, and the opportunity to rekindle a connection to who we really are as human beings, what's living on the inside, what is our essential truth and true nature, and why are we here, and how can we come together, how can we really lift each other up and support each other, and co-create together towards that future that is coming towards us at a hurtling pace, perhaps in ways that we might not have chosen, but it's coming anyway. And the opportunity to step into that future together with others, just I feel so like deeply grateful and honored and blessed to be a part of this conversation. So I just really wanted to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being so willing to have this conversation, and to also, in the speaking and sharing, something I can feel is opening up in me that is visceral and tangible and felt. And I feel that that is the place that I trust, because it's living within me. And as I keep leaning more into that place, it kind of grows. And I'm really curious and really excited and really interested to see what is that going to look like with others as we kind of come together.
Thank you, Priya, and I just want to echo the theme of gratitude. None of this in the last hour would have happened without you, without your initiative, without conversation, without this dialogue, and that spark that happens when two or more people get together, as we have just now, to have a conversation. Do we have half a minute for me to end with the Against Fear verse?
Absolutely.
Would that be possible?
That would be wonderful.
We've said this to many of our students. And my dear wife wrote this out this morning in her own handwriting, because I was scrambling to get ready for this conversation on a Saturday morning. This is Against Fear by Rudolf Steiner. We must eradicate from the soul all fear and terror of what comes to meet us from the future. We must look forward with unshakable equanimity to whatever comes, and we must think only that whatever direction is full of wisdom. It is part of what we must learn in this age, namely to act out of pure trust in the ever-present help of spiritual worlds. Truly nothing else will do if our courage is not to fail us. Let us strengthen our will, and let us seek the awakening from within ourselves every morning and every evening. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you, Torin. It's been extraordinarily wonderful, as always. I know that we're going to continue these conversations, and we're hoping to invite anybody who's listening to us now to come and join us in the coming weeks. And details of how you can do that will be in a link at the end of this conversation. But for now, for everybody who is listening, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that you have enjoyed this conversation as much as we have. And we just are holding you all in our hearts and prayers at this time, and hoping that all your families stay safe and healthy and well. And we're so looking forward to continuing this journey together. Thank you.